This sort of mental attitude that some Greeks, such as the Athenians, may have had towards the Macedonians, however, has nothing to do with ethnicity, but it's rather fueled by other elements, such as the subsistence of a monarchical regime that was rooted in the traditions of the most archaic Greece, not to mention a form of monumental and funerary art that could be indebted both to the Mycenaean and, up to a certain extent, to some Thracian customs. What this means is that the answer when it comes to the Macedonians' ethnicity and ethnogenesis and their belonging when it comes to Greek identity is nuanced. On one hand, the Macedonians were a Greek people, but even within the Greek world, they still maintain their own uniqueness and regional variety. Having established this, let's now talk about a different possible legend that has to do with their beginning. Another line of interpretation wants to trace the beginning of the Macedonian people to the city of Argos, at least when it comes to the ruling house. According to the legend, there were three brothers, descendants of King Temenus, who would have been exiled from Argos and after taking refuge in Illyria would have moved to Macedonia, putting themselves at the service of the local monarch. The myth that would have the Macedonian ruling house of Argive origin, called precisely Argead or Temenid, is very interesting, but we don't know if it's the result of a superimposition of different later elements. Regardless, the author who repeatedly reaffirms the Greek origins of the Argeads is indeed, as we said, Herodotus. Indeed, he reports that Alexander I presents himself to the Persian ambassadors as the Hellenic governor of the Macedonians, and that he then justifies his support for the Greek coalition during the Second Persian War by being Hellegenos, of Hellenic stock and origin. Finally, Alexander I will be judged Hellenic by the same magistrates who decide who can and cannot participate in the Olympics, despite those who would have wanted to exclude him because he was Macedonian. But Herodotus is not the only one to report the Greek origins of the Macedonian ruling house. Aeschines, Greek statesman and Athenian orator, defines Amyntas III, Philip II's father, as, once again, Hellenic, and Thucydides, who is an Athenian historian and general, reaffirms the origin of the Argeads from the Temenids of Argos. Finally, Socrates indicates Philip II as a man of Greek blood, emphasizing that Argos is his ancestral homeland. Before we continue, I think we need to go a little deeper when it comes to the myth that designs or marks as the land of ancestral origin of the Macedonians, the Orestis. The Orestis is a region of Upper Macedonia, currently located in West Macedonia, Greece. This origin myth, which would place the Macedonian monarchs as coming directly from the Orestis, is recognized by the Hellanodikai, the magistrates who decided precisely who could participate in the Olympics and who could not. We have to keep in mind that the original homeland of the Argeads was not so much Argos in the Argolid, but much more probably the center of Argos, Orestikon, which is located precisely in the Orestis. Consequently, the ruling house of Macedonia, from a strictly ethnic point of view, was not constituted by elements that differed from the people it governed, and while being distinctive and unique in its fabric, retaining political institution, peculiar dialects and ritual forms, both the people and the ruling house were Greeks. After this voyage and journey that we spent with sources and iconographic evidence, analysis of material goods, how do we explain then the fact that, at least in some verses, the Macedonians are in fact indicated as barbarians? There are a few figures in ancient Greece, particularly belonging to the Athenian world, such as Demosthenes and Pericles, who do reiterate a few times that the Macedonians were barbarians. And according to some contemporary scholars, this attitude should be sought more than anything in the propaganda of a certain Athenian political party that did not look favorably upon Philip II's hegemonic claims. Yet even Isocrates, who is favorable to the sovereign, while on one hand he presents the tradition that would have had the Macedonians to be of Argeads or Greek origin, on the other hand he does still seem to imply a certain barbaric nature. Last but not least, we have Thrasymachus of Chalcedon, Greek sophist, who calls the Macedonian king Archaealus, once again, a barbarian. In order for us to fully understand this apparent contradiction between those sources that name them as clearly Greeks and those thinkers, sophists and historians who instead consider them barbarians, we have to look at these words in context. Athenian orators like Demosthenes labeled Philip as barbarian, but this was a rhetorical move meant to delegitimize Macedonian political claims and preserve the cultural boundaries of Hellenism. Nonetheless, the Macedonian elite made deliberate efforts to Hellenize their public image to counter this slander. Philip sponsored Panhellenic festivals, claimed Heraclid descent, patronized Greek intellectuals, and as we know, Alexander went even further, presenting himself as a world monarch in the mold of Achilles or Dionysius, spreading Greek language and culture as part of a civilizing mission. But the ultimate proof that can clear the way and absolutely demonstrate that this was not an actual fair representation of the Macedonians as barbarian, but it was nothing more than slander, rhetorical and propagandistic move, is in Plato's words. According to Plato, for example, the language spoken on the island of Lesbos, an Aeolic dialect, was a barbaric language. According to Hesychius, Greek grammarian, instead, the Eleans of the northwestern Peloponnese who spoke a Doric dialect are, once again, barbarian. In this perspective, the fact that according to at least some Greeks, specifically the one in the Attic context, some other Greeks would be considered as barbarian, particularly in the way they spoke, help us define this word, barbarian, giving it a very relative weight. In other words, if you think that Macedonians are barbarians and not Greek because of the way some Athenians described them, then you should also think that Aeolians, Ionic, and Dorians were not Greeks either, which would be insane. When it comes to the ancient Macedonian language, no full text remained, and what scholars have had to do was to piece together approximately 100 to 200 glosses, isolated words, identified in ancient lexicons or inscriptions as, in fact, Macedonian. These fragments, recorded by grammarians like Hesychius and Pollux, are difficult to interpret and are often transmitted through layers of Greek redaction. With that being said, current scholarly consensus articulates Macedonian as a Greek dialect, possibly the most archaic and conservative form of northwestern Greek. Inscriptions from the Macedonian kingdom, particularly under the Antigonid dynasty, are overwhelmingly Greek, a testament to the region's elite Hellenicization. Although we have to keep in mind that the choice of script and language in official documents may reflect a political strategy, rather than the authentic vernacular spoken by the lower classes too. As such, this linguistic evidence is interesting, but not conclusive. Plutarch is the one to let us know that during the quarrel that would tragically conclude with the assassination of Cletus by Alexander the Great, the Macedonian monarch, seized by rage, would have called out loudly in the Macedonian language to his personal guard. And again, the Macedonian idiom would have been used by Alexander's soldiers to welcome the Greek general Eumenes of Cardia, who, on the other hand, when he found himself in the necessity of having to parley with the Macedonian Neoptolemus, would have used as an intermediary a messenger named Senias, who, in one of the Oxyrhynchus papyri attributed to Arrian, is defined as speaking Macedonian. Quintus Curtius Rufus, Roman historian, finally reports that during the trial of Philotas, accused of having taken part in a conspiracy against Alexander, the general would have chosen to defend himself speaking in Greek and not in Macedonian, this to be understood by most of those present. From this anecdote, we can understand that even though Macedonians could understand other Greeks would have had some trouble understanding spoken Macedonian. The final picture that we can draw for our conclusion, even though we're still missing some pieces, is to me quite categorical. The ancient Macedonians were absolutely Greeks, although in their own way they were regionally unique from a linguistic, cultural, political and military standpoint. Of course, as always, do let me know if I missed out some references or some sources, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Were the ancient Macedonians Greek or were they barbarians? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.